All right, so let's finish off this chapter. Everything we've talked about up to this point has been skeletal muscle, voluntary skeletal muscle, or a complete name, voluntary striated skeletal muscle. This last portion, we're going to talk about the other two types of muscle tissue. Cardiac muscle is only found where? Yeah, perfect, in the walls of the heart. And voluntary skeletal muscle cells are really long. When we learned about these in the tissue chapter, I told you that cardiac muscles branch, like one cell kind of forms a Y shape. And maybe there's one nuclei or maybe there's two nuclei per cell. There is some striations, just like in the voluntary muscle, but it's light. But there is striations just like there are sarcomeres, the same thing we were studying with voluntary muscle. We have a lot of mitochondria. It makes sense. I need my heart to have lots of energy. Cardiac muscle cells is the only place in the body where we can find intercalated discs. And that's kind of like the heart's duct tape, making a better connection between different cells. Cardiac muscle cells are autorhythmic. Put those words together. What's auto? Yeah, automatically. Create their own rhythm, right? They have their own pacemaker. We'll learn much more about that in Kin 224. And the heart muscle cells really can influence the heart rate as well as how forceful the heart is contracting. This can also be controlled autonomically. Autonomically means automatically. You don't have to think about all day long. You don't have to tell your heart to beat, right? If it did, we would die. Your voluntary muscles in your arms and legs, you can control those. But cardiac muscle is involuntary. Here's one cell branching in to a couple of different directions. Here we can see some intercalated discs, so we have nice strong connections between them. If we look inside, we would still find the nucleus and mitochondria, so they have lots of ATP. The rest of this chapter, we're going to deal with the third type of muscle called smooth muscle. And it's really found in almost everything we're going to talk about in Kin 224. Your blood vessels are mostly smooth muscle. Inside your lungs, in your respiratory system, the bronchioles is smooth muscle. And these things can expand or dilate, and they can control how much air is going in or how much blood is going through certain areas. Your digestive system, the intestines, lots of smooth muscle. And it can mix things together like in your stomach, or it can push them forward. Our urinary system, a couple of places have smooth muscle so that we can move urine or liquid waste from one area to another. And the uterus has lots of smooth muscle to force out, not only during childbirth, but even during menstruation. The smooth muscle in the uterus is contracting. Lots of different systems involve smooth muscle. The confusing part, though, when we see it, in reality, everything we were just talking about is some kind of tube, like my respiratory system or a blood vessel or a ureter. So here's where we're going to find the smooth muscle. All of these pictures here is part of a circle. It's so complicated. The open portion is called a lumen, so where it says lumen. But for each of these, the smooth muscle is part of a circle of a blood vessel. And the next one, the respiratory tract, it's another circle, and all of this is smooth muscle. Here's my digestive tract, which is, again, a big tube, and smooth muscle goes all the way around it. My urinary system, you're getting the idea. Smooth muscle cells also have a unique shape. We said voluntary muscles were really long with multiple nuclei. Cardiac muscle cells were branched with one or two nuclei. And smooth muscle cells are fusiform shape, almost like a Nerf football. They're wider in the middle and kind of come to a point. On the ends are tapered. They're going to have one nuclei right in the middle. They're much smaller. They still have that wrapping going around them, the sarcolemma. They're still going to involve calcium and voltage-gated channels to help contract. But these do not have transverse tubules. When we see the picture, there's little pores, there's little openings. Caveolae, I'll show you those, and they kind of increase the surface area. We'll talk much more about that in 224. Don't get lost into that. Here would be one smooth muscle cell, and really we could call this smooth muscle tissue, right? Because a bunch of cells create this tissue. But here we can see how they kind of fit together when that Nerf football shape, they kind of create sheets, right? The unique thing is when they contract, inside of here they have these structures that pull toward the middle, almost like wringing out if you were trying to get all the water out of a towel. And so here would be relaxed smooth muscle, and then here are two contracted smooth muscle cells. And basically notice just everything pulled toward the nucleus, pulled toward the middle. Smooth muscle does still have thick and thin filaments that interact, but they have two unique structures, dense bodies and dense plaques. We'll learn about these on the next slide. Keep these distinct. The dense bodies interact with the sarcoplasm. I'm going to get gross here for a second, and I guess kind of trigger warning, but basically the bodies are floating in fluid versus the dense plaques. Plaques go on the wall. Remember, the sarcolemma is like the cell wall of these smooth muscle cells. So the plaques go on the wall, dense plaques attached to the sarcolemma. The dense bodies kind of float around in the sarcoplasm, that more gel-like fluid. Smooth muscle does still have those contractile proteins, remember those thin and thick filaments, and they attach to these dense bodies and dense plaques, but we saw they're not straight lines anymore. They run at oblique or angles of the cell, and that's why when smooth muscle contracts, it kind of twists. Again, imagine you're trying to get all the fluid out of a towel, how you're kind of twisting it around. Some key things to make a note of: smooth muscles do not have sarcomeres, and smooth muscle cells do not have Z-disc. That's why there's no striations. Smooth is smooth. Voluntary muscle had these striations that would feel kind of rough. Hang in there a little bit more. So the anatomy of smooth muscle and the anatomy of skeletal muscle are similar. They have the actin and the myosin and that troponin, remember, with the calcium and all that. But here's some differences. Smooth muscle can make additional cross bridges. They have what's called a latch bridge mechanism. And the cool thing about this is they can take those cross bridges and kind of lock them into place. Smooth muscle can hold a contraction for a long period of time. Think about how much time there is between going to the bathroom, right? And the smooth muscle in your urinary fluid had to hold that fluid in for maybe 4 or 5, or maybe you were sleeping and you went 8 hours without going to the bathroom. Now imagine a voluntary muscle holding contraction for 8 hours, right? There's no way it's going to. So only smooth muscle has this latch bridge mechanism, and it extends their contraction without needing more ATP. That's the main thing we need to know. Smooth muscle also has calmodulin, and here's a great word if we could put together. The cal is because what we're talking about is dealing with calcium, and modulin modulates what that calcium is doing and when it starts a contraction. We also have some enzymes that are unique to smooth muscle, myosin light chain kinase. Don't get too worried about this, but they activate it. And then we have myosin light chain phosphatase, which basically is involved with the opposite, relaxation. We're going to walk through here. We have smooth muscle outside the smooth muscle cell, inside the smooth muscle cell. The first thing that happens is calcium goes in, but we don't have those T-tubules. We have those little holes, those pores called the calveoli. Look at that cal for calcium. It's a hole for calcium to come in. Once calcium is inside the smooth muscle cell, it finds this calmodulin, the thing that modulates what calcium is going to do. And it binds to it. It causes it to change shape. Picture this as like a mousetrap, and something touched it, and it changed shape. As soon as it changes shape, now we're going to start to fire off some enzymes. That MLCK, myosin light chain kinase, all of this is building up energy. We've got to do some phosphorylation. Now we have that ATP that can be involved in causing a contraction. Thick grabs thin and pulls it in. The difference is we're not nice and linear. Things are running at an angle. But the smooth muscle cell can hold the contraction longer because of cross-bridge formation. It kind of locks it in place. To get our words, first we had a stimulus. and that put calcium into the smooth muscle cell. That calcium enters and finds the calmodulin and makes and it binds to that. Starts to fire off some enzyme activities. So do we phosphorylation. All this is helping us build energy so we can do some cross bridges. We still involve thick and thin filaments. Remember, the bodies are more toward the middle of the cell versus the plaques are anchored on the cell wall. All of this pulls it inward and the entire cell shortens. It goes towards the midline. Smooth muscle also needs to relax, and it's going to relax once it stops being stimulated. And just like the other muscles we've seen, the main thing of relaxation is getting calcium back out of the cell. There's also dephosphorylation. We're just taking this and getting it ready for the next time we're going to be using this. So some enzymes will help with this. But smooth muscle contractions can be slower to relax. It's part of, and again, the last chapter is all of childbirth and pregnancy, and we'll talk much more about this, but that's part of why childbirth is a long process, and then even after the baby is born, there's probably more contractions going on. Smooth muscle takes a while to get going and takes a while to finish. Some differences. Smooth muscle has a longer latent period. Remember, that's after the stimulus but before contraction. Smooth muscle contractions do last longer because it's calcium just kind of better controlled, but mainly we have those latch bridge mechanism. If you know, like a screen door and you prop it open and you put a little thing beside there to hold that door open, you created a latch bridge mechanism. Now you don't have to stand there holding the door open. Smooth muscle can do that on its own. Smooth muscle is very fatigue resistant because it doesn't take much energy. It's much more efficient than voluntary muscle. And then again, using that latch bridge, some of the times I'm contracting and I don't even need ATP. Smooth muscle also does not have as much length-tension relationship. Remember, with voluntary muscle, the more I stretched it, it actually got a little weaker. But because of the smooth muscle pulls at an angle, it's able to work when it's stretched or when it's contracted. 200%, you could double its length, or you could make it half as long as it's supposed to, and it still can contract forcefully. This is important because think about emptying your bladder, going to the bathroom. Whether you've got just a little bit of urine in there, a whole lot of urine in there, or even if you just urinated, you could probably squeeze out a couple of more drops. Any of that time, no matter what shape your cells are in, you can still contract. This is probably controlled autonomically, and again, that's going to be the last chapter in 223, but autonomic is automatic. You don't have to think about it. Your body uses those neurotransmitters, and it just happens automatically. Smooth muscle is often controlled autonomically, and again, that's automatically or involuntary. You don't have to think about telling your stomach to push something to your intestine and the first part of your intestine to push it to the last part of the intestine. You don't have to sit there for 3 hours thinking, don't pee, don't pee, don't pee. It's not till enough urine happens and then you're even aware of it. So all of this is automatic or involuntary. But oftentimes it relates to a neurotransmitter. Just like we saw that acetylcholine with voluntary muscle. An example of this could be those tubes up there around the lungs, the bronchioles. And a certain chemical, acetylcholine, makes them contract. And then another chemical, norepinephrine, makes them dilate. If these tubes dilate, I'm going to get more oxygen in. If these tubes contract, I'm going to get less oxygen in. Another way that smooth muscle is controlled is it responds to stretch. Genic means to generate, and myo means muscle. So this is literally the muscle responding to how much it's being stretched. Your urinary bladder knows about how much urine is inside the urinary bladder. It can tell itself what's going on. And another one that's a little more complex is a stress relaxation response. This is like if you try to, if you decide, okay, I'm not going to urinate for the next 24 hours. Well, your body will go along with you for a while, and your body will build up urine, and eventually there's going to be so much urine in there that even if you don't want to, your body's going to say, hey, I can't continue to hold this, I got to relax. I've been stressed for so long, the only response is to relax. Other things that can influence smooth muscle is hormones, or we could say chemicals in general. The pH of the environment, whether I'm oxygen or whether we're talking about our digestive system, how much oxygen or CO2 is in there, chemicals and drugs, and even like the heart or artificial pacemakers can influence what smooth muscle is doing. Smooth muscle is arranged a couple of different ways. If I'm a multi-unit smooth muscle, and these are found around the eye. We'll see in chapter 16 the ciliary creates the pupil. What's an erector pili muscle? Remember, those were the ones that attach to the hair in our skin. These multi-units are also in the larger parts of our respiratory, not necessarily the tiny parts of our lung, but like your throat portions, and even some of the larger arteries have multi-unit smooth muscle. These are similar to the motor units we were looking at with voluntary muscle. With multi-unit, this is a little tricky. But when it says contract individually, it's the unit that contracts. The whole unit in that area, like a motor unit, comes on and goes off. And we could kind of like recruit more motor units to get more activation. But the main arrangement, the most common type, is a single unit smooth muscle. Viscera kind of means organ. Remember that from chapter 1? We had like a visceral peritoneum, the structure right on the organs that are in your stomach. And most of these are single unit smooth muscle. Here the cells kind of act by themselves. There'll be a bunch of these together, so they make sheets. Again, this is so complex, but what we're talking about is that tube structure, right? And here's all the smooth muscle. And if this works together, they can make this opening bigger around or smaller. We're talking about places like our respiratory tract. Most of our blood vessels have single unit, and then the majority of our digestive system. If we have this single unit smooth muscle set up, sometimes communication happens through where the chemicals go through varicosities. Remember those? It's like the synaptic knob that had that synaptic vesicle with probably the same neurotransmitter, acetylcholine, or there's another one we're going to learn about called norepinephrine. But basically these are chemicals that are causing the muscle to contract. There's going to be receptors just like we saw before, but a key difference is a bunch of smooth muscle cells could be stimulated simultaneously. Remember we were talking about voluntary muscle, only those in one motor unit could be stimulated by a nerve. Stimulation can also literally spread from cell to cell, so it doesn't need a nerve going to every muscle cell the way we saw the neuromuscular junctions and skeletal muscle. All right, last picture, hang in there just a little bit more. These are our smooth muscle cells, and they're arranged two different ways. Here's a multi-unit smooth muscle, one nerve, and when this nerve fires off, all of these places are going to release the neurotransmitter, and all of the cells contract at the same time. Versus in this one here, a single unit smooth muscle. Here's the nerve going through it, and the nerve has several little pouches. These pouches are called varicosities. And when this nerve is stimulated, it's going to release its chemicals from there. And technically, just these chemicals are going to affect the cells right next to it. The more it's stimulated, this one is going to release chemicals and affect the cells right next to it. If there's enough of these chemicals, we could also, because of the gap junctions, this smooth muscle cell could cause a contraction in the next smooth muscle cell. It can pass through where there is no nerves. All right. Hey, listen, if you're still with me, I'm real proud of you. This is a dense chapter, but you muscled through it. Doc's proud of you.